Happy birthday, JC. Welcome to another edition of Ambassador Radio. I'm your host, Justin Boss. Today we're going to look at a little excerpt from The Gospel Mystery of Sanctification by Walter Marshall. The version I have here was edited by Jeffrey Perry. This is one of the best versions I've seen of this. It's got nice large font. It's got big wide margins. Other versions of this book, font's pretty small, makes it harder to read. You feel like you're accomplishing a lot because there aren't a whole lot of words on each page. So even though the book itself, the one I have, is like almost 500 pages, you feel like you work your way through it pretty quickly because it's got such wide margins and large font. But anyway, Jeffrey Perry, he's going to be one of our speakers at Deeply Rooted Conference this November. So go register for that, deeplyrootedconference.org. And we asked him to speak specifically because of the work he's done on this book. He must be the most sanctified person on the planet if he studied this Walter Marshall book so much. But anyway, The Gospel Mystery of Sanctification. We did an episode on sanctification not too long ago with Louis Burkhoff. Let's see what Walter Marshall has to say. And I almost just want to read from this book and not even necessarily comment on it, but I'm sure I will because I'm sure I can't help but comment. Anyway, here we are, Gospel Mystery of Sanctification. We're just going to open up, pick it up, and see what it says here. However, I guess we should read what comes before it instead of just starting out with a however. Let's start back. God has promised that the wayfaring men, though fools, shall not err in the way of holiness, and that he will teach sinners in the way. The meek will he guide in judgment, and the meek will he teach his ways. And he commands them that lack wisdom to ask it of God in faith, nothing doubting. That's James, right? We also saw something from Psalms. However, we are to know that God guides us only according to the rule of his word, and we must endeavor to learn the right way of believing out of the word. Or else, we are not able so much as to trust rightly on God for guidance and direction in this great work of holiness. So he says here, to help you, I've given you before in this treatise a description of saving faith and have shown that it contains two acts. All right, so this is really where I wanted to get to. The two acts of saving faith. One, believing the truth of the gospel. Right? That's something that is required. You have to know the good news, right? You got to trust the good news, believe the good news. The other is believing on Christ as revealed and freely promised to us in the gospel for all his salvation. We've talked before, salvation is not just justification, it's justification, sanctification, glorification, that he does it all. So trusting in the gospel and trusting in the Christ of the gospel. And we may think that's a little redundant, but we must have the true Christ, and we must understand all the benefits that come from Christ and his gospel. So here we go. Let's keep going. Now, your great endeavor must be to perform both of these acts in the right way, and I shall show concerning each of them in particular. All right, firstly, he says, you are to endeavor for right belief in the truth of the gospel of Christ, so that you may be well furnished, disposed, and encouraged to believe on Christ, as revealed and promised in the gospel. It seems simple, but we forget that all the time. We forget that our trusting in him, just believing in Christ, that is the means through which he saves sinners. So in this way, you are to remove all uncomfortable thoughts and objections of Satan in your own conscience and are able to overcome all corrupt inclinations that hinder a cheerful embrace of Christ and his salvation. This book is so loaded with joy because it's all about Jesus. Yeah, it's about sanctification producing holiness, but we are looking to Christ throughout this entire book. And maybe I should tell you a little something about Walter Marshall. Marshall lived in the 1600s. He was under the preaching of Richard Baxter, which you may know, he's famous for writing the book The Reformed Pastor. Richard Baxter was a legalist, and he talked to Thomas Goodwin, another English preacher, and kind of got set on the right track where he was in a deep, dark depression after listening to Richard Baxter preach. But anyway, so that gives you a little context of it. It is found by experience that when any fail in the second act of faith, remember what the second act is, believing on Christ as revealed and freely promised to us in the gospel for all his salvation. So forgetting that, and the reason is some defect in the first, right? And that's why they're so closely linked. We forget the gospel, and then we forget the benefits of the gospel that are in Christ. There is some false imagination, Marshall continues. There is some false imagination or other in them, contrary to the belief of the truth of the gospel, which is a stronghold of sin and Satan that must be pulled down before they can receive Christ into their hearts by believing on him. If they knew the name of Christ as he is discovered in the gospel, and judged aright of the truth and excellency of it, they would not fail to put their trust in him. And we are in great danger of entertaining such false imaginations, and to account many truths of the gospel strange paradoxes, and to be foolish and pernicious, because of our ignorance, guilty conscience, corrupt affections, manifold errors, with which our judgments and prejudices in matters of salvation, and because Satan labors to beguile us, as he did Eve, through his subtlety, to corrupt our minds from the simplicity of the gospel that is in Christ. That's 2 Corinthians chapter 11. So our own minds hinder us from the gospel. And this is not just in justification. This is in sanctification. Satan can't have you, Christian. You are Christ. You belong to him. You are safe and secure. Yet your own conscience reminds you of your sin. Satan reminds you of your sin. And then we forget about Christ. Because why? We're just focusing so much on our sin, focusing so much on how we're disobedient, how many more works we could be doing or should be doing. I shall therefore, he continues, give you some particular instructions that are of greatest moment to prevent such defects as we are most liable to in the first act of our faith. You must believe with a full persuasion. This paragraph is great. You must believe with a full persuasion that you are a child of wrath by nature, as well as others, fallen from God by the sin of the first Adam, dead in trespasses and sins, subject to the curse of the law of God, and to the power of Satan, and to unbearable misery for all eternity, and that you cannot possibly procure your reconciliation with God or any spiritual strength to do any good work by any endeavoring to get salvation according to the terms of the legal covenant. It's the covenant of works. And that you cannot find any way to escape out of the sinful and miserable condition by your own reason and understanding, without supernatural revelation, nor be freed from it, except by the infinite power that raises the dead. That paragraph is to remind us, it ain't what you do. It is all about God's supernatural work for you and in you. For you, for justification. In you, in sanctification. This is what we are to be reminded of, that we are helpless and hopeless on our own. We cannot reconcile ourselves back to God. That's what he said. All right, let's keep going. We must not be afraid, as some are, to know of our own sinfulness. A lot of people are afraid to even admit that they're sinners because it might give them a bad reputation. Or, well, I'm a member of that church. I can't be known to be a sinner. Well, that's the only kind of people that are in the kingdom, is that sinners saved by grace. So we must not be afraid to know of our own sinfulness. Neither must we be willing to think ourselves better than we are. Well, maybe we'll say, yeah, I'm a sinner, but I'm not that bad of a sinner. I'm not that bad. I'm better than this other person. Well, better than the worst? Great. You must be perfect, is what Jesus said. If you're to earn heaven on your own works, cannot happen. As I think it was George Whitefield. I've probably attributed this to Spurgeon because a lot of things like this say Spurgeon, but I think it was Whitefield. He said, I would rather climb a rope made of sand to the moon than to get to heaven by my own works. And I think I used an alternate version of that. Tracy has a bunch of goats. I think I said I would rather climb a pile of goat manure to the moon as opposed to try to get to heaven by my own good works. They are equally as likely. But we must be desirous and glad to know the worst of our own condition. When we see ourselves as worse than worse, then we will look to the one that is better than best, and that is Jesus. Yea, when we have found out the worst that we can of ourselves, we must be willing to believe that our hearts are deceitful and desperately wicked, beyond all we can know and find out. That's my yearly Valentine's card to the wife, Jeremiah 17:9, right? That our hearts are desperately sick. This is all necessary to work in us true humiliation, self-despair, and self-loathing. And some of you might cringe at that word self-loathing as being a positive. Well, let me finish this paragraph. We'll get back into that. This is all necessary to work in us true humiliation, self-despair, and self-loathing, that we may highly esteem and earnestly seek the salvation of Christ as the one thing necessary. That is why self-loathing is good. No, self-loathing, as we may know it, a lot of times isn't even self-loathing. It is really so much pride that I think I deserve better. That's self-loathing. Maybe wanting attention, things like that. But the right self-loathing is saying, I in myself am helpless. Same thing, self-despair. I in myself am hopeless. Humiliation says, I in myself am hopeless. And that's why the second half of that sentence that says that we may highly esteem and earnestly seek the salvation of Christ as the one thing necessary. That is the only way to salvation. And remember, salvation is not just justification. It is sanctification and glorification. We are glorified by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ. We are sanctified by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ. We are justified by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. The one thing, the only thing, Jesus is our only hope. And thanks, Walter Marshall, for reminding us of this. We may come back to this and look at another excerpt at some point down the road. But until then, remember, Gospel Mystery of Sanctification. You should go order a copy. This version, edited by Jeffrey Perry. You can find it on Amazon. There are other versions out there too. But we may have a few deeply rooted this year, maybe to give away, maybe a few to give for a donation to say thank you. But y'all have a great week. We'll see you next time. Ambassador Radio is a ministry of Bass Chapel Baptist Church, 611 Zion Hill Road, Sir Gornsville, Tennessee. Visit us at basschapelbaptist.org. Service times 10 a.m. Sunday school, 11 a.m. corporate worship, 6 p.m. evening worship, 6 p.m. Wednesday nights. We hope to see you there.
Maybe 8 creed.